So we have a question on stock investing, and then we have a question on using U.S. banks, and then we have a question on fiat versus alternative currencies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We have another one, I think. Okay. Advice, do you have any financial or investing advice for young people, young adults like in their early 20s?
I think there's going to be somebody like a financial advisor, is there? Coming
Yeah.
also speak?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because it seems like there's going to be clearing misconceptions about building wealth and investing. I'm assuming that, and then creating a financial mindset. I assume that those will probably address that question. But we can try to touch on that as well. Define riba. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So you guys see the questions that we have up here. So I'm not saying we're going to limit to these, but I like to have like a contract between myself and the participants that inshallah, whatever we put up here, we will address bi'ithnillah, inshallah, to your satisfaction. Should we get started?
Yes, inshallah.
Okay. So I'm gonna erase this, but don't worry, I still have it. So the eraser is kind of slow.
Sorry.
No, it's my eraser. Okay. All right. Okay, so while we're doing that, all right. So, okay, so Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Let me see if I were to, let me see if I can stop the whiteboard. طيب, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Okay, so just I want to just tell you sort of my background and how I got into Islamic finance a little bit, kind of my story. So, I was born and raised in the US, in Washington, D.C., and lived in Gaithersburg pretty much most of my life. And I went to University of Maryland. And when I went there, I was asking all the different teachers, my teachers and the scholars and imams, like, what should I study? And I wanted to do something really to help the ummah. And nobody had a good answer for me. And then one of them said, study banking because we need Islamic banking. And so I ended up studying finance, and I was coupling that with my Sharia studies with different teachers in the DC metro area. And seriously, when I was studying finance, I was like, this stuff is all haram. I have no idea how this can be combined with Islam to make something Islamic. But I persevered, and then ended up, working in different capacities in California. I worked there in a real estate company, Islamic finance. And then I ended up moving to Saudi Arabia, and I worked there in one of the largest banks in Saudi Arabia. And I also did my Sharia degree in Al-Qura University in Mecca. And then after working in Saudi Arabia for a while and getting also exposure to Bahrain and the Middle East and kind of learning how they do Islamic finance, then alhamdulillah, I did my master's in Malaysia, and I went to Malaysia because the biggest Islamic finance markets in the world are basically in Saudi Arabia and Malaysia. And Allah blessed me to work in both countries extensively. So I moved to Malaysia, and then alhamdulillah, I did my master's there and worked in one of the largest banks in Malaysia, as well as Indonesia and Brunei and Singapore, and that whole Southeast Asia region. And each place does Islamic banking differently. And the goal was and is to do something and to help our Muslim community in America to, inshallah, find solutions. So that's been my journey for the past 16 years in Islamic banking. And so it's a big, huge world of Islamic banking. And so, inshallah, we can explore it a little bit together. So, by the way, if anybody has any other questions that they want to add to the list, then maybe you can give it to our brother to add to it. And if you have any questions, like in the middle of the presentation, please let me know. I wish I was there with you physically, so I can like call out people who look like they're sleeping. But alhamdulillah, inshallah, the hearts are connected and we're connected via this technology. Bi'idhnillah. Okay. So anyway, that's my little introduction. Okay. Now, let's start with this story of a cat and a dog helping us to explain Islamic banking. Now, there's a famous story in the hadith literature that the Prophet ﷺ told us that once upon a time there was a lady from the children of Israel, and she was a prostitute. And she was walking in the desert or walking somewhere, and she was thirsty, so she went into a well and she got some water. She pulled out some water from the well and she drank. And then she saw a dog, a thirsty dog, who was licking the wet sand because it was so thirsty. And she said, this dog is thirsty just like me. And so she actually took off her shoes. She went in the well. She filled it with water. She gave it to the dog. And the hadith says that she was forgiven for all of her sins because of that kind action she did towards the dog. Also, on the flip side, there was a woman from the, people before us who, for some crazy reason, she decided to take a cat, like this cute cat we have here, to take the cat and imprison it in her home. And she didn't feed the cat, and she didn't allow the cat to go out and hunt and survive. And so the cat died from starvation. And although she was a believer, the Prophet ﷺ said that she's going to be punished in the next world because of her cruelty to this animal. And so what we take out of this really is that in Islam, throughout the Sharia, you find the importance of doing good and avoiding harm. That we seek to not harm anyone, neither an animal or a human being, even more importantly, and we seek to do good. And so when we're talking about Islamic finance, I remember when I was in Saudi Arabia and structuring all kinds of products and all kinds of complicated stuff. And I happened to meet with one of the pioneers of Islamic banking in the world. His name is Dr. Omar Chapra. And people who are in the know that he is one of the famous Islamic economists, or Muslim economists, who's written a lot of the foundational texts on Islamic economics. He was very old. I went and I met him in his office, and he had like a desk full of books. And I asked him, Professor, can I speak to you for a moment? I didn't have an appointment or anything. He just, mashallah, graciously let me in. And I said, what's our goal in this whole endeavor, this Islamic finance, economics, all these transactions that we're doing? He said the goal is to make the financial system a rahma lil alameen, to make the financial system a mercy to all. And then he quoted the hadith, the ayah, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We did not send you except as a mercy for all. And that really resonated with me. And from that point on, that became my North Star, if you will. That became my guiding light. So when I look at Islamic finance, I look at it that Islamic finance is financing in line with Islamic law. But what's this Islamic? We need to unpack the word Islamic in anything. The word Islamic, if we look at it from the higher aims of Sharia, it's about maximizing benefit and minimizing harm to individuals and society. That's the big picture, okay? Maximizing benefit, minimizing harm. They say, dar'ul mafasid wa jalbul masalih. Now, what are benefits? What are harms? So this is where we have a framework. And if you have heard of the word of maqasid al-Sharia, the aims of Sharia, you get into this. And actually, okay, yeah, we can look at this. So we have 5 main aims of Sharia that the scholars typically say. And the way that they determine these is by looking at the entire corpus of the Sharia and looking at sort of the common trends, right? And you find that the 5 aims of Sharia are the preservation and protection of religion and morality, life, family, intellect, and wealth or property. And that without these, society cannot function. And so you find things in the religion to protect these. So life, obviously, so you find rules against murder. Family, you have rules against zina and, illicit relations. Intellect, you have rules against alcohol and intoxicants. Wealth, you have rules against theft, right? And then morality and religion, many of the rules, of course, revolve around protecting the religion. And then there's also punishments for, those who play around and seek to misguide people in a Muslim state and things of that nature. What's interesting is that all of these, the scholars say, are universal. These are universal concepts that are not, particular only to Islam. It's a universal. You find these in all religions, or if not most religions, but I think I would say all of them, and legal systems as well, typically. And so therefore, the beauty of that, because these are also central to Islamic law, is that Islamic banking is really banking. We can define it as, and this is my definition, banking that seeks to maximize the benefit of the society and individuals, minimize the harm, with specific focus on the universal values of protecting morality, life, family, intellect, and wealth. When Muslims do something, this is always what we're focused on. This is how we are weighing things, right? This is how the Sharia weighs things. And then it's about weighing them, right? It's about making the calculation, balancing the benefit and harm. And, there's another story which about the Arabs. The Arabs were interesting people, right? The Arabs, they used to love drinking and they used to love gambling, but they're also very generous. And so typically, if somebody was, drunk, people would get drunk, right? And then a poor person would come and maybe a beggar would come and ask, and then they would, mashallah, give so much charity to the beggar. I'll give one camel, I'll give two, and they compete to give all this money to this beggar. They're drunk, mashallah, but whatever's inside, I guess, comes out when the person's drunk. So in any case, they're generous people, so they're extra generous when they're drunk, but obviously they do other bad things as well. Similarly, when they would gamble and the person who wins, there was this culture that if you win big in gambling, then you should give some to the poor. So also the poor people were outside waiting, outside the Arabian casino and asking the winner to give them some, and the winner would give them. So we find in the Quran, the ayah that says, they ask you, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They ask you about wine and gambling. And the Quran says, قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. Say that it has a lot of harm and some benefit. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. But the harm is more than the benefit. So we spoke about the harms and benefits here, right? So now, which one is more? So there is this balancing. So we could, if we were to summarize the rule, right, that the scholars are looking at whenever they're giving a fatwa typically, overall, anything that has a net harm to society and the individual is prohibited. And anything that has a net benefit to society and the individual is allowed. This weighing of the harms and benefits is the role of the Sharia scholars when they say something is allowed or not allowed, and there are tools to do this type of analysis called usul al-fiqh, Islamic legal analysis, or Islamic jurisprudence. So, but for us, we ask ourselves, are the benefits more than the harms? Then generally it'll be allowed. If the harms are more than the benefits, then generally it'll be prohibited. But we have to also realize that when we talk about harms and benefits, we're not looking only at this world. We're also looking at the hereafter as well, right? So obviously, if something is explicitly, categorically haram, Allah has already done the calculation for us and told us that the harm is overall more than the benefit, right? But this is overall kind of the way that the Sharia is built, the logical sort of underpinning of the Sharia. So now bringing it to Islamic banking, right? So looking at the harm to society, and this is especially relevant to investing, right? Because you're going to learn later on about the screens and how, Muslims, when we invest, what we invest in, what we don't invest in. And overall, anything that has a net harm to society, you find that Muslims we avoid these types of things. We don't invest in them, we don't finance them, we don't insure them, we stay away from them. So typically something like conventional finance institutions, because they're involved in interest and riba, we avoid them, and we can touch on some of the rationale around that. Alcoholic beverages is pretty clear, gambling, pork, pornography, promoting war through sales of arms and ammunition, right? Tobacco-related products, all of those, because the harm is more than the benefit, we do not get involved in them, okay? Now, I want to take also kind of, we're still looking at the macro kind of picture. We talked about, when we speak about what's called Islamic economics, right? As Muslims, typically economics is about how do you manage resources. The goal of a Muslim, of an Islamic perspective on economics, is maximization of human well-being in this world and the next, within the framework of Sharia and the moral norms of Islam. So everything that we're doing is really falls under Islamic economics. We want to maximize human well-being. Sometimes that's called falah. أولئك هم المفلحون. We find in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, أولئك هم المفلحون, the people who are successful. And when it comes to the Islamic economic worldview, what are the most important pillars? There are four most important pillars, one could say. The first is the oneness of God. And so when we say oneness of God, it means that God is the owner of everything. And if God is the owner of everything, and the one who controls everything, the one who created everything, then we are his slaves and we have to obey him because everything belongs to him. So he's the one who sets the rules, right? So we obey him, Azza wa Jal, in how we deal with his property, right? In this world. And we have been appointed as the vicegerent of God in this world. So the human as an ethical developer, and so this is our role. This is part of our ibadah to God, right? Part of our worship of God, right? Is that he gave us this world and he told us to develop it and told us to do good things in this world. And we seek to do that in the ethical way, and realizing that everything we have is a trust from him. So the human as a trustee. And it's very different from the Western view, where the human being, when you take God out of the picture, the human being thinks that he is the one who controls everything. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. The human being transgresses when they think they're self-sufficient. When they think there's no God, when they think they provide for themselves, then they answer to no one, human beings. And so they would transgress. They transgress on other human beings. They transgress on resources. They transgress on animals, and so the Muslim perspective is very different. The Muslim sees God as the owner of everything. We are his slaves. We have been given the trust to develop this world in an ethical way. And our guide in that is the Sharia. Our guide of that is the, not just Islamic law, but sort of, some translate Sharia as moral theology. Our entire morality, the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us is our light to light the path for us. Okay, so then I'm going to get a little bit more into some principles. But does anybody have any questions that kind of sprung into their mind from what I've said recently, or anything that's not clear? Just so you can make me feel at ease that you're not asleep.
If you have any, if you want to write them down, you can send them up as he's talking as well. If we can't filter them out, if it's something we're going to pass to him, we'll pass to him. If it's something we're going to talk about later, we'll wait till later.
Okay. All right, inshallah. Yeah, please. Every question I consider it as a wonderful gift that you are giving. So some principles of Islamic finance, and these are all actually principles that we find. They're called qawa'id fiqhiyah. Many of them, they are maxims, legal maxims. So one of them is divine responsibility. I kind of alluded to that. The Quran speaks about and when your Lord said to the angels, I am placing on earth a deputy, right? And so we are here responsible to Allah on this earth. Also, there is another rule, which is called al-ghunmu bil-ghurm, that the spoils go to the one taking the risk. So in Islamic transaction law, we find that if you want to make money, you have to take some level of risk. If you never take any risk, now risk takes different forms, but if you never take any risk, then typically you don't get any return. So that's kind of how it works. Also, there's another rule says benefit follows liability, al-kharaju bil-daman. So one of the examples of this is that if you are entering a relationship with someone, for example, someone is going to you give someone money, an entrepreneur money, to invest on your behalf, and you're going to share the profits. So maybe the entrepreneur, he himself doesn't have any money, but he is not going to take a salary. He's going to work to invest the money, and if there's a profit, you're going to share it with him. But if there's not a profit, the person who put up the money is going to lose money, but the one who also did the work is not going to get any payment or any salary also. So they both take liability, and so they both can profit from the venture together. There's another one which everybody knows about, which deeds are judged by their intentions, based on the famous hadith that, deeds are by their intentions. And this also relates to contracts. When you're doing contracts, it's important to look at the intention behind the contracts as well. There's another one called custom is given the same weight as law, which is interesting because sometimes you have transactions that you have customary practices, and in Islam we accept customary practices, and as long as they're not against the Sharia, those are acceptable to integrate into our practice. Prohibition of acquiring wealth unjustly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not devour the wealth of one another unjustly. Avoiding riba and any invalid contract that can lead to riba. And here we have an ayah that says Allah has made trade permitted and riba prohibited. Also dealing in that which is good and wholesome and avoiding wicked things. So the Quran says, and Allah has made good things permitted and wicked things prohibited. And there should be no causing harm or reciprocating harm, which we alluded to. This is a hadith, la darar wa la dirar, taking into account the rights of all involved and avoiding causing harm to anyone or to their wealth. So these are kind of, we're building sort of a moral framework when we're transacting as Muslims. So to sort of recap, right, Islamic banking, why is it important? From an Islamic economics perspective, we're talking about recognizing the sovereignty of God. When we do our banking, when we do our transaction Islamically, we are recognizing the sovereignty of God. We are seeking to obey God. We are seeking to develop the earth in line with the will of God, and we're seeking to fulfill the trust that He has put upon our shoulders. So actually doing this type of Islamic banking and integrating this into our life is essential for maximizing human well-being in this world and the next. And then on the other end, higher aims of Sharia, protecting religion, life, intellect, family, and wealth. When we do Islamic banking, we are actually protecting these things, whether we realize it or not. But you will find, inshallah, when the person from Amana speaks and other people, that your investments, when you invest in an Islamic fund, these things are being taken into consideration in what you invest in and what you don't invest in. Okay. All right. So that's sort of, the building this kind of philosophical perspective. Now, I want to just talk a little bit about a comparison between Islamic and conventional banking. A lot of times we use the word conventional banking in the industry. So there is a difference from an ethical perspective and from a structural perspective, okay? When we look at a conventional bank and an Islamic bank. So from an ethical perspective, they're both required to follow the law of the land, right? Nobody can break the law, but Islamic has to also follow Sharia law. So you find that even in America, we have some conventional banks that have Islamic operations, Islamic windows. Like there's a bank called Divan Bank in Chicago. There's another one called University Bank or University Islamic Financial in Michigan. There's La Riba in California. And these all are Islamic windows or Islamic banks. And so they have to follow Sharia and as well as the law of the land. And sometimes there's a negotiation, right? It's like, okay, people who have Islamic mortgages, for example, might find that they get like this interest form, how much interest they paid. And that's the law of the land. And so the scholars actually allow that. And once again, when it comes to Sharia, deeds are by their intentions. So if everybody knows that they didn't actually pay interest, but the law requires you to have a form that says you paid this much in interest, but everybody knows that this is profit or this is rent, then it's not prohibited, if that's the law. If we can avoid it, we would avoid it. But when we weigh the benefits and harm, do we shut down Islamic banking or do we have an interest form? Then the benefits and harms are pretty clear. Also, but the difference is that the Islamic bank is prohibited from anything against Islamic law. So anything that has a net harm to society. Conventional banks don't have that same, ethical framework, right? Nowadays, conventional banks are trying to get more on board with ethics and stuff like that. But in Islamic banks, that's kind of embedded into their DNA, right? So the intention of Islamic banking is to mobilize the wealth of society and deploy it in ways that must not harm society and that seek to maximize benefit to society. So that's the intention. That's our goal that we're trying to do. Structurally, conventional banking, now this is the way the majority of scholars will look at conventional banking. There are some people who have a different perspective, but I'm just going to tell you what the majority of, the vast 99%, are saying. All right. Okay. 255, Mashi. So conventional banking functions on the concept of loan with interest. Okay. So they give you money and then they want the money back and they want something extra, which is the interest. Loan with interest is equal to renting money. That's economically even. They say that interest is a rent that you pay to use money. You pay rent on land. You pay rent to use people's services, which is basically a wage. And then to use the money, capital, you pay the rent, which is interest. Now that perspective for us as Muslims is a problem. Islamic law does not allow renting money. It allows renting land, property, workers, but not money. All right. Islamic law considers loan, which is defined as giving money now in exchange for money later, as a charitable act where the money is guaranteed and no stipulated profit to be agreed up front. Discretionary gift is allowed as long as there's no express or implied condition. So what does that mean? That means that if I'm in need and I asked my brother, for a loan, $500, can I pay you back in a month? He says, sure. Then he says, but I need you to pay me, a bit extra. That extra is not allowed. Or if he says, I need you to come and tutor my kids, in Arabic because I know you speak Arabic, since I'm giving you this loan, that's not allowed. But if it has to be a purely charitable act. But if when I repay with something extra, or I come and I tutor his kids just as a favor, then that's fine. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he used to repay people's loans, it's very famous that, a Jewish man, came, who lent money to the Prophet ﷺ, and he came early. And he yelled at the Prophet ﷺ. He said, hey, you owe me money, pay me back, because your people are known to not pay on time or whatever. He was going off on the Prophet ﷺ. And, Umar who's there, the Sahaba, Umar is ready to just take out the sword and deal with this person, this rude person. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, it's okay. And then he goes and tells one of the Sahaba there, go. And it seems like it was a camel or something that was the loan was in the form of a camel. And he said, go to the treasury to, repay the man the camel. And then the camel, they said, the camel that we have in the treasury is actually much more expensive than the camel that he lent to you. And it wasn't actually, the debt wasn't due yet. And the Prophet ﷺ said, give him the better camel. because the best people are the ones who repay their debts in the best way. And I do believe that the person became Muslim afterwards, because, you know, people would test the Prophet ﷺ. One of the signs of him ﷺ being a prophet is that, you know, he responds, you know, when people do bad to him, he responds in a good way. And when he repays his debts, he repays them in the best way. So discretionary gift is fine, but stipulation is not allowed. Islamic law sees loan with interest as harmful to society, as it displaces charitable giving and gives unfair and unjust return to capital provider. Actually, one of my friends, he did his PhD on the wisdom of the prohibition of riba back in Saudi Arabia, trying to figure out, you know, like he looked at all the different opinions throughout history, modern and traditional opinions about why is riba, what's the wisdom, why is riba haram, and we can translate it kind of loosely as interest, right? And he found that there are different opinions, but his opinion, after all of that, his PhD, he believed that the strongest reason is that when riba or interest-based lending becomes prevalent in the society, people will no longer give charitable loans. It's like people will be programmed to only, like, somebody's in need, okay, I'll give you a loan. How much interest are you going to pay me? No, that's not enough. Like, while people should actually help each other out, right, that ends up going away. And that's a really, really bad thing for the society. And then on top of that, it gives an unfair and unjust return to the capital provider, where if the person has money, they can actually just lend it to people who are doing business with a guaranteed return. They can take, you know, collateral, regardless of whether the person's business succeeds or not. They will still get their return, and they never at any point take any risk to their money. So that is also a problem. So these are kind of some of the wisdoms behind the prohibition of interest. So Islamic law uses ethical trade and investment as the only way to make profit from money. Loan is not a profit-making instrument. So a loan, just giving a loan and wanting back more money, is not a profit-making instrument in Islam. It has to be based on buying and selling. So we find actually throughout Islamic finance, if we get into Islamic finance, we'll find that buying and selling is always one of the key elements. It could be buying and selling, you know, on a deferred basis with payment that's going to be in installments with an increase due to the fact that payments will be over time. That's fine, but it's trade. So we find that Islamic finance revolves around trade, different forms of trade, buying, selling, renting, partnerships, things of that nature. So, I mean, this is kind of an example of, like, you look at a conventional bank model, you know, when you deposit, you're actually lending to the bank. The bank is paying you principal plus interest. The bank is effectively renting your money. And then when the bank loans money to its customers, it's giving a loan, and the customer pays principal plus interest. And then the customer, if he took a conventional residential loan, then he would use the money to buy a property or invest in his business or whatever. Islamic banking, when the customer deposits with the bank, there are different relationships. But if it's a loan, the bank may or may not give a gift, an extra amount when it repays the loan, but it's not contractual. Or the bank may take this money as an investment and then invest it in other types of projects. The example here we're giving is someone wants a house. The bank is buying the property and then leasing it to the customer. Customer sells the property to the bank and receives cash. Customer pays. Customer sells the property. I guess customer would let's sell the property. I mean, the bank is buying the property and then leasing it to the customer. I think customer sells the property is it should be like maybe that might be a mistake there. And then customer will pay rental to the bank, and on maturity, the customer will buy the property from the bank. So that's typically like a home financing. But you find that the key here is that the Islamic bank is buying, leasing, and the conventional bank is doing loans. Okay. This is about overall maqasid al-Sharia. I think we already touched on this. Some of the aims of wealth in Sharia is that circulation, wealth should circulate. We find in the Quran that states, so wealth is not circulated only amongst the rich. So economic activity, trade, charitable giving, we find that this is an important aim of Sharia, circulation of wealth. Also wuduh, clarity. So we find that, yes.
I don't mean to interrupt. We had a few questions. Someone wanted you to repeat the section about mortgage, Islamic mortgaging.
Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to have a specific discussion about the mortgages with the whiteboard, and I'll draw some stuff, okay?
Okay, inshallah.
I know everybody wants to know about that. All right, so if you enter into a debt for an appointed term, it should be written down. So we find that, you know, the economic activities, the rights and obligations have to be very clear. Stability and proof, we find rule of law and things of that nature is very important. Justice is very important. And the development, investing money is also kind of a very important thing. We have a hadith that says to invest the money of the orphan so it's not devoured by zakah, which is very interesting, where if there's an orphan and that orphan has money and you're responsible for the orphan, right? The hadith telling you to invest that money. So because you still have to pay the zakah on that orphan's money, because the zakah is an obligation on the money, even though the orphan might not be responsible yet, might be a baby, right? But the orphan has $100,000, for example, left behind by their father, for example, who passed away. The zakah still has to be paid by the wali, of the orphan, by the person responsible. And so if every year 2.5% is being paid, on top of that you have inflation. When the orphan comes of age, they might find they only have half of that money. And so it's interesting that there's a hadith that says to actually invest the money of the orphan and do tijara through it. Ittajiru fi mal al-yatim. Do tijara so his money is not devoured by the zakah. When it comes to Islamic finance, we find that the concept of need is very much front and center, and which allows us to sometimes pick and choose what is the right fiqh opinion that can actually fulfill the needs that we have. And sometimes there are some dispensations when to do something that might be a little prohibited when the majority is not prohibited, because we don't live in a perfect world. We're going to see that when it comes to like investing in stocks, right? That you can't build a portfolio with all 100% perfect companies. No companies are dealing with any interest or anything like that. And if you don't invest, then like the orphan's money, your money will also probably be decreasing. And so scholars have allowed some dispensations to say, okay, well, if the haram element is small, then it's permitted to invest with certain guidelines. So which we can touch on, inshallah. Okay, so I think that I want to stop with this, and then I want to move to the whiteboard. I know that you guys have to go and pray. Okay, so let me switch to the whiteboard. Okay, let's see how we can do that. How do we do that? Whiteboard. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, can you re-enable the whiteboard, Mr. Host? I see. Okay, go here. Okay, here. Share. All right. Now we have the whiteboard up. Okay. Okay, so someone's asking about mortgages. So first thing I want to talk about stock investing. I want to start down our list. So stock investing, the first important thing is that what scholars said, as I mentioned before, right, is that we don't have perfect companies anymore. We don't have companies where everything is perfect. So that being the case, we have to realize that if we don't invest, then there's inflation and there is all these things. And so how do we protect our wealth? So what has happened is that, the scholars have basically said, if the haram element is small, so they said there's three kinds of companies. There's companies that are fully haram. Their business is haram. Everything they do is haram. Obviously, you can't deal with them. Fully halal. Obviously, that's wonderful if you can find them. And then you have what they call mixed. What's mixed? It means that their business is halal, generally halal business. Yeah, and maybe they make software or something like that, but haram, some haram activities. So in here with the haram activities, the scholars are basically focused on a couple of things. So one is they say giving and taking interest. And here, riba, someone asked for the definition of riba. The traditional definition is the prohibited increase in certain types of wealth. But I think here, when we talk about riba, we're really going to say that the easiest way is we're going to say that it's interest. Anything that is a stipulated increase over and above a debt, over and above a loan. So if you take a loan and something over and above that would be riba. So here, giving and taking interest, and then the other one is profiting from haram activities. Okay, so giving and taking interest. So here, what the scholar said, as long as it's a small amount, they say it's acceptable. It's acceptable because there is a necessity, there is a need. And in order to fulfill the need, we have to allow some dispensation, because we find throughout Sharia that anytime there's a difficulty, Allah gives us a dispensation. Like when you're traveling, you can shorten the prayers, you can combine the prayers. If you don't have any food, you can eat pork, right? So we find that there is this spirit in the Sharia. So typically they say total debt over, I'll use over, for example, total assets is less than 33%. That's typically one of the ratios. Another one, they'll say total cash and interest-bearing, like interest-bearing and instruments. Typically, they say cash deposits, for example, and interest-bearing instruments over total assets is also less than 33%. So what is this? It's about, if you have debt, you're paying interest. If you have cash deposits, you're receiving interest. So they have this 33% threshold. And because there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said in a particular context, 1/3 and 1/3 is a lot. So they say anything that is less than 1/3, it's not a lot. So typically that's what they do. When it comes to the haram activities, they say haram revenue over total revenue less than, can I move over? 5%. Sorry, ran out of space. Less than 5%. And then typically what they do is they'll say that this 5%, this, whatever this haram element, this one, you purify it. You give a donation to purify your wealth. How? So you would calculate, and Islamic funds typically do this. They'll calculate, they'll say, okay, this company has, $10 million in interest revenue. And then let's say they have, 10 million shares. Okay. So you can say that every share effectively maps to $1 of interest revenue, and you have 100 shares. So they'll say $100, you should give in charity to purify your wealth, because technically you're like a partner in this company. So you're a partner in the crime of receiving the interest. Or whatever haram, maybe they have some alcohol subsidiary, or maybe they have some investments in it's an airline and they sell alcohol and there's some money that they make from that or something like that. You would do this. Now, the beauty of, if you have an Islamic mutual fund, they'll do all of this screening for you. And they'll also tell you this is how much you need to give in charity to purify your wealth. So that's the beauty of actually having an Islamic mutual fund. Okay. So, all right. So that's as far as the stock investing. So you can invest in stocks. based on this opinion. There has to be this screening methodology. There are companies that do it, mutual funds. There are some applications that will actually, you can screen specifically. But this is basically the framework that we're working with. Are there any questions about that? I know this was one of the important questions that people wanted to know about.
So there were some questions that I placed in the chat, brother. One of them is there a difference between paying interest and paying late fees to a bank?
Oh, okay. The quick answer is no. Paying late fees is generally seen as interest, and that's what they used to do in Jahiliyyah, where they used to say, if you want more time, then you have to pay more. And that was the riba that the Quran speaks about, that says, then, take notice of a war from Allah and His Messenger. So you definitely should not pay a late. You should do everything you can to not pay any late fees in anything, because effectively that additional amount that they're charging you is because they're giving you more time, and that would be actually riba. So it's very dangerous, actually. May Allah help us and protect us. It's something that typically almost everybody falls into. So yeah, so that's an important point. Unless, if that late fee, it reflects their actual cost, the damages that they have suffered because, for example, they had to call the person, they had to send them a letter or whatever. If it reflects their actual damages, then that's acceptable for them to charge. But for them to profit by giving a person more time on a debt that they have incurred is not allowed. What Islamic banks do in order to discipline people to pay, they will have a mandatory charitable donation. So they'll actually take a quote unquote late fee, but it says that that late fee will go to charity. So it's a form of disciplining the person by effectively forcing them to pay a charitable donation. Because sometimes if people don't have this kind of thing, then they won't pay on time. So I hope that answers the question. I think there was another question that someone asked also about using the US banks. Oh, someone said, how does credit card debt relate to the 1/3? Okay, credit card debt, how does it relate to 1/3? It doesn't relate to 1/3. I didn't mention anything about credit card debt. I think credit cards, effectively, when the credit card is giving you a line of credit, it is giving you a loan. And therefore, anything that you were to pay over and above the principal amount would be interest. And so would typically fall under the category of riba. And so therefore, if you decide to use a credit card, and typically the scholars say that you shouldn't use a credit card unless you have a need. Like if you don't do it, there's some difficulty, like maybe you need to, develop credit and things like that. Then you should really kind of as much as possible, make sure that you don't pay late, and make sure that you pay the entire thing and you don't pay any interest on it. So there is no concept of 1/3. In the Muslim world, we have Islamic credit cards that work on various models. Inshallah, hopefully we can have these things in the US as well as we further develop. Yeah, but the 1/3 has to do with investing more so in the stock market, the companies that you're allowed to invest in. Okay. Someone asked about using US banks. I think when it comes to banks, that we spoke about the model of banking, which is that when you deposit in the bank, you're lending money to the bank. And so since you're lending the money to the bank, normally scholars say you should not put money in a conventional bank because you are facilitating them to do whatever prohibited things that they do. But if you have no other choice, if there is no other place where you can protect your money, then you can do it. I think in America, there might be one bank, University Bank in Michigan, that actually you can deposit in. So, they don't really give much of a return from last I remember. I don't know if things have changed. But, if you can put your money in an Islamic bank, come to Turkey, and then if you're visiting Turkey, if anybody visits Turkey, you can go into any bank, Islamic bank, and open an account with your passport and a utility bill from your country. And then you can actually have money in an Islamic bank that you can get a return on, whether in dollar or lira, and you can make investments and all kinds of stuff. So that's probably, an ideal solution is you have, you're more international and you actually, have money in Islamic banks. But, if you don't have access to that, then you can put it in the US bank. Should you take the interest or not? I mean, scholars have different opinions. It's probably safer not to take the interest, and just if you get interest, give it away in charity or put it in a non-interest bearing account. That's probably the safest approach. There are opinions that say in non-Muslim countries, and you can take it, but I would say safer approach is always nice to take. Okay. So last question. Are we going to wrap up, or are we going to come back after prayer?
Does anyone want to come back after prayer? We got to pray here in a few minutes. Does anyone want to come back and have their brother present a little bit more? Do we want to continue through the program? If there are more questions, it'd be good to have him talk a little bit more. But he's in Turkey, we're here, so I want to be respectful of his time.
It's like 10 p.m. where he's at.
Okay. So they just called the Iqama. So inshallah, we'll go ahead and pray, and we'll come back for a few minutes, brother, okay?
Okay, we can come back. Okay, inshallah, no problem. Okay. Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Same screen. You have the Islamic bank or financing company, and then you have the customer. Okay. So what the Islam, and then you have the house. All right. What the Islamic bank will do is they won't give the customer money. What they'll do is they will actually buy the house. Okay? They buy the house. And then after they buy the house, they then will sell the house to the customer on installments. Okay. And so maybe if they buy the house, let's say for 100,000, and they're going to sell the house to the customer for 200,000 over 30 years. Okay. And then the customer is basically effectively just going to repay the bank. Customer is going to make, I don't know, there's not a very nice picture, but payments. Okay. Payments. Now, the Islamic bank will still also take a mortgage on the house. I'm sorry, my picture is crazy. It's going to take a mortgage. But why does the Islamic bank take a mortgage? Basically, just to say if the person, now the customer owes the Islamic bank for the house, and if they don't pay, then they will have, the bank has the right to take the house and sell it to recoup its debt. Okay, so this is called murabaha. The Arabic term for it is murabaha, or cost plus sale. And we find that Islamic banks use this method to finance homes. Now, this is one method. Okay, there's another method. Let me see if I can okay, clear. I wonder if I can, that's nice. I can clear the whole screen. The other method that's also prevalently used, prevalently, is that you have the bank and then you have the customer. Okay. And then let's say you have the house here. Let's see if we can do that again. So in this case, this is a co-ownership model. This is what guidance does. Okay. The bank will put up 80%. They buy 80% of the house. Okay. The bank buys that. The customer puts up 20% of the house. Okay. And then what the bank does is the bank will then lease or rent its share to the customer. So the customer is going to have to pay rent to customer because it owns 80% of the house. It's going to rent to the customer. Customer is going to pay rental payments. Okay. Rent payments. But also also the customer, it gives a promise to buy out the bank. I promise that I will buy you out. Every month, I'm going to give a certain amount to buy your share. Okay? And then he makes also payments to buy out. Now, this is typically called he's paying the principal, but he's actually buying the share of the bank every month. And then effectively, the bank is selling its share every month to the customer. Every month, the bank is selling its share to the customer. So this is called a diminishing co-ownership. So this is how like companies like Guidance do their home financing, and now a lot more companies are doing it like this as well. The first method is called murabaha. This is how companies like UIF in University Bank, Divan Bank were doing it. And these are used all over the Muslim world. Now, regarding and the key issue here is in the difference between the conventional and the Islamic is the conventional is going to give cash, give a loan, and they never actually take ownership. They never actually buy the house, take ownership of the house. While the Islamic will never give the money to the customer, but will actually be buying a share in the house. And for your information, because of this, Islamic banks in America have to go state by state, getting permission in every state to allow them to do this transaction in this way, because it's not a normal way of doing secured lending. But alhamdulillah, in America, they do allow Islamic banks to do that. So alhamdulillah, we have that. There is another method that's not used as often, which is similar to this, but it's also rent to own. But instead of also the bank will buy the entire property and rent it to the customer. And then there is a promise that at the end, the customer will, and then the customer will actually also buy out the share of the bank, but at the end of the contract, as opposed to throughout the contract. But the key is that in Islamic, it's based on trade, buying and selling and renting. In conventional, it's based on loan. And as a customer, the most important question that you have to ask is, does this company have a board of scholars who are specialists in Islamic transaction law, who have approved this product? And do those scholars do an annual review to make sure that the company is actually acting on the fatwa that they received? If they do those two things, they have scholars who have approved it, who are qualified, and they have an annual review to make sure that everything is continually being followed, the fatwa is being followed on a regular basis, then you can use any of the companies. Don't worry yourself about, oh, this one's not a Sharia compliant, that one is not, this one is better. That's really, go with whatever one is best for you. And there's been a lot of noise in America, and it's really bad. And a lot of confusing people, making people like so scared to use the Islamic companies because it's like a lot of bad acting. The most of them, and this is the international standard, is does the company have a scholarly board, typically 3 scholars who are approved the product? Number 2, are they doing what's called a Sharia audit every year, checking to make sure that these contracts are being followed properly according to the fatwa? If those 2 are there, you're good, inshallah. Hopefully that answered the question. Someone was asking, if a credit card gives you benefits beyond the money to pay conveniently, is this halal? Credit card gives you points towards free. Yeah, it's no problem to take that, because now the lender is giving you a loan and the lender is giving you something extra. So there's no issue with that. The problem is when the lender demands something extra from you. All right. But otherwise, all the benefits and stuff, cashback, all that stuff is fine. No issue with that. Okay. Okay, so that's on the home financing.
We have a question from the audience as well.
Brother Juan, go ahead.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum, my brother.
Walaikum salam.
Okay, there are many ways of financing in America. Does Islamic Foundation provide financing for rehabbing houses that are purchased?
So say it again, I'm sorry, I was distracted. Does Islamic?
You provide financing for rehabbing a house that's been purchased.
Does Islamic banking provide avenues for rehabbing houses that have been purchased?
So, okay, so I mean, it has to do with, are there methods in Islamic finance that can do it? Of course there are, right? But are there institutions and investors who are willing to do that? So, and that is the second question. So, I mean, there are only a few Islamic finance companies that are operating in America. So a couple of them are banks, University Bank, Divan Bank, La Riba, right? They're all Sharia compliant. And then there's Guidance Residential, which is a home financing company. They have certain business models, right? So whether or not they can finance, for rehab, you have to contact them and see whether that's in line with their business model. But then, if something like this is done on a private basis, with a group of investors, for example, who are willing to finance, the rehab of a property, there are many ways, to do it, from an Islamic perspective, where, they could buy the materials and then sell it, at a markup, or, they can, you can enter into a partnership, where the investor is putting up some money and the customer is putting up some money, and part of the money is used to purchase the property, other part of the money is used to rehab the property, and then it's going to be leased to the customer, for example, with a promise to purchase out, to buy out the share of the investor. So those can all be structured and done. So if you have to first ask the Islamic finance companies who are in the market whether they would do it, and if they don't do it, then you have to then find investors, who would be willing to do it, or we start other institutions, that can maybe enter, financial institutions, community empowerment institutions that can take on these types of projects. Allah knows best.
But I look at the short will send it out. It also says developing an investor mindset. Does that mean that you're providing information for us to invest in Islamic banking?
Okay, so I will answer. Yeah, I will answer that question. Not necessarily in. So Islamic banking will talk about that, but investing in general, right? And investing, I mean, we can talk about a lot of things. You can invest time, but we're talking about finances, how to actually increase, financial wealth. That's what we talk about, is like developing that mindset, right? That's the section I'll get into, which will be next, inshallah. Okay. Any more questions to Brother Ashraf?
I think before, go ahead. Sister has a question.
Is any sister? None of the sisters have any questions?
There was one question that I didn't answer yet, which is about fiat currency. I think as far as fiat currency is concerned versus alternative currencies, I mean, you find that the vast majority of scholars, generally don't seem to have a problem with fiat currency. It also goes back to the Maliki, the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, that he was, originally they used to use gold and silver, but he was also considering using, camel skins as currency as well. He didn't end up doing it because he was worried that people would start slaughtering all the camels, to use their skins. But nonetheless, that was something that he was going to do. And so particularly Imam Malik took this as an approach that that anything that people use as a currency, as money, the rules of riba would apply to it. Other madhahib said, rules of riba only apply to gold and silver. But generally, I'm not aware of any scholar that says that money has to only be gold and silver. I don't believe that that's been an approach in the tradition. People used non-precious metals as well as money. The debate is only whether or not the rules of riba would apply if you're using non-precious metals. That's kind of where the debate is. So whether we should look at alternative currencies, I think it's useful to look at things like Bitcoin, to look at things like precious metals and all of that. Obviously, one of the problems with the US dollar is that the money is going to be, if it's in banks, it's going to be backed up by loans. It's inextricably connected to the interest-based system, right? But if you're holding precious metals, for example, that's not linked to the interest-based system in the same way, or even something like holding Bitcoin or something like that. It's being held. So I think it's a bigger debate that society needs to figure out. But on just black and white, halal, haram, it's halal to use fiat currency as a general rule. That's what the scholars say. And then as things develop, Allah knows best, hopefully we can always think what's better for us, what will maximize our benefit and minimize our harm. We can look at that big picture and use that framework to try to make the decision. Allah knows best.
Any more questions about anything before we let the brother go? All right. Brother Ashraf, we want to thank you for, I know, you're in Turkey and everything, and the time difference. We really do appreciate you, giving us this time. Alhamdulillah, you definitely contribute to the program greatly, adding that scholarly aspect. A lot of the other brothers here, we're investors, but we needed that aspect that you did to kind of lay the groundwork. Inshallah, we really appreciate it.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I'm always at your service, and I mean, there are always special cases for special circumstances, that we can then continue to discuss, on a one-on-one basis. And, brothers and sisters, feel free to connect with me, reach out. Inshallah, with the intention, we'll all work together to try to make things better for our communities, for ourselves, our families, our communities, inshallah. And there's always a solution in Sharia. Sharia, there's always a solution. If you're trying to, and if one door of haram is closed, you'll find that many doors will open. And inshallah, we can try to help open those doors together. Barakallah feekum.
Barakallah. So inshallah, next time you're back in the States, we have to link up, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone, and forgive my shortcomings, and may Allah bless all of you.
Allahumma ameen.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.